Jonathan Sacerdoti, i24 news correspondent in the UK. Jonathan, why is this coming out now? This is dominating many headlines, not just in the UK.
What's happened here is in court papers, she has named Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz as people who are involved in some sort of global sex scandal, where Jeffrey Epstein, who is a convicted sex offender, is said to have trafficked her and offered her to powerful men around the world for sexual favors. Of course, both Dershowitz and the prince have denied this categorically. And in fact, there are other accusations, I believe, involved in her papers involving other big names like Bill Clinton as well. So it's quite possible that there is no truth in these sorts of accusations. And Alan Dershowitz himself has filed papers with the courts
he has
in Florida.
Filed papers in the court in Florida. He's even called this an anti-Semitic move. And before you continue, let's actually have a listen to what Alan Dershowitz had to say about these allegations.
The allegations against me are totally made up. They're absolutely false. They're made up out of whole cloth. I don't know this woman. I never had sex with her or any other below-age woman or any woman having any association with Jeffrey Epstein. I wasn't in the places at the times that she alleges.
Okay, that's, very strong, words denying this, obviously, by Alan Dershowitz, which one would expect. But that said, Jonathan, do continue. What is known about this woman? If in case some of these allegations or there's some truth to the matter, what do we even know about her?
Well, she's named in the court papers as Jane Doe 3, but of course it's been said in the papers here that she's Virginia Roberts, and interviews with her have even been conducted and published now from over the past couple of years. Prince Andrew denies any form of sexual contact with Virginia Roberts. He flew back from his skiing holiday yesterday to manage the crisis, and Buckingham Palace issued a statement on Friday that said any suggestions of impropriety with underage minors by the Duke was categorically untrue. Now, some reports over the weekend have suggested that Prince Andrew may have been secretly filmed with one of the girls he's alleged to have been involved with, because there's some evidence suggesting that Jeffrey Epstein might have had hidden cameras in his properties in Palm Beach, Florida. So on the day of his arrest, apparently, according to these reports in some papers, the police were in possession of photographs showing some of these alleged occurrences. But there is no suggestion, again, as yet, that Prince Andrew is shown in any of those photographs. Now, Roberts' father claims that she met the Queen sometime at Buckingham Palace. But of course, the Queen and Buckingham Palace have issued a statement saying that they have no record of such a meeting, and they categorically deny that as well. Her claim is that she was flown all over the world by Jeffrey Epstein, and she would give him massages on his private jet and be used as some sort of sex slave between 1999 and 2002. So obviously what this does is it rips apart the normally very controlled presentation of the royal family, suggesting that there may be this sort of activity going on, absolutely denied by the palace, at a time when Great Britain is rather rocked by all sorts of underage sex scandals, historical underage sex scandals, and it chimes with that people are wondering who was and who was not involved in this sort of activity over past decades.
No, I know. I mean, the thing is, you just said the line that I want to follow up with the question of the historical sex scandals, which, that opens the door to so many questions. But I do want to ask you about the names mentioned in this scandal, not just Alan Dershowitz, but former Prime Minister and Defense Minister Israeli Ehud Barak is actually named floated in this whole, international global sex scandal. Is that something that's being touched on by the British papers as well? Clearly, of course, here there's also a denial by the Barak, people.
So far, the British press is obviously rather fixated on the idea of Prince Andrew, as the son of the current Queen,
no contest
being involved in this sort of activity. Exactly. Dershowitz has made sure that he's been very publicly shown and interviewed and been categorically denying that he had any involvement. And his suggestion was in all of those interviews that all these other people, especially Prince Andrew, ought to take action themselves in the courts and ought to deny this, because Dershowitz says that he wasn't even in the places where he was alleged to have been when these things happened, and that he can prove that. Now, Roberts has said that he ought to prove that, and that he needs to prove that he wasn't involved, and stands by her allegations about all of these people, and that people who are victims of these sorts of sexual abuse crimes ought not to be silenced, and she refuses to be silenced again, even by these powerful men who she is alleging have somehow abused her. Of course, the names are so big, the story is so fantastical that it's either the scandal of the century or more, or she's something of a fantasist, and some of these allegations, if not all of them, will be absolutely shown to be untrue, and these giant names weren't involved in some sort of international, interstate sexual favors and sexual slavery scandal. But of course, we've yet to see, and quite rightly, Alan Dershowitz is taking it to the courts to have his name removed from the papers so that there can be some sort of official record. These allegations can't just be made without any kind of evidence and trial to show that these men were actually guilty of any of these alleged crimes.
No, definitely. And Tony...
If I might just chime in there for a second, Jonathan, but Prince Andrew hasn't actually denied having known Jane Doe 3, this Virginia Roberts, correct?
That's correct, and there are photos of him with different women at different times. None of them suggest that there was any kind of sexual relationship. He was indeed a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, which was an embarrassment for the palace when it was found that he was guilty of sex crimes. And so that has been plaguing him and Buckingham Palace since. But of course, there's some level of difference between having friendship and dealings with somebody who turns out to be a convicted sex abuser and having been involved in that kind of sexual abuse, the second of which is a very serious allegation, which of course the palace is keen to say is absolutely untrue.
Untrue. And finally, you know, not just the headlines, obviously, in the tabloids in the UK, but, you know, in the court of public opinion, how are people in the UK taking to this?
We have a bit of a love-hate relationship here with the royal family. Sometimes there are people complaining, what are they for, what do they do, how much of our money do they spend? And Prince Andrew is no exception to that rule. He's meant to have involvement as some sort of roving international ambassador for trade, but of course that has meant that sometimes his dealings with different people involved in slightly more controversial areas of trade and in some more despotic countries has been seen as a problem. On the other hand, those sorts of trade often bring in big money for the UK, so it's not necessarily Prince Andrew's fault that he's involved in those things or that the state is involved in those sorts of commercial activities. This is just another example of the kind of controversy that the family has to put up with. And when they do have to deal with it, it of course reawakens all sorts of other opinions about whether or not we should have a royal family at all and whether or not these people are answerable like the rest of society and like regular politicians who would be subject to more close scrutiny and transparency that we of course expect in a democratic country.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you for shedding such an intelligent light over a story that is very, in many ways, whether true or wrong, whether right or wrong, quite sordid. But Jonathan, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thanks a lot, yeah.